Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really core challenge facing so many mission-driven organizations, churches all over the world. It boils down to this question. What happens when the money stops coming? For, decades, external support, often foreign support, it was the absolute lifeline. It built things, funded critical work. But the sources we've looked at for today, that reveal something kind of surprising, that generosity, that initial help, if it goes on too long, it can actually become a barrier to real long-term sustainability. So this deep dive, it's about exploring that subtle tension, when dependency accidentally pushes dignity aside.
It's such a crucial conversation because we're really looking for, let's say, a blueprint for genuine financial maturity. And that means fundamentally reframing the whole mission. It's not just economics. It's a leadership question, a spiritual one. Our goal here is to figure out how organizations shift their mindset, move from just survival mode, waiting for that next check, to a mindset of stewardship, real local ownership. The narrative has to change. It can't be about who sends and who receives anymore. It needs to be about who is stewarding the resources, stewarding the mission, right there on the ground.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Because if foreign funding is literally keeping the lights on, how can it possibly be harmful in the long run?
Well, that's the paradox, isn't it? The paradox of dependency. What's really key here is seeing that while the funding provides a kind of safety net, a floor, it also almost unintentionally acts as a ceiling.
A ceiling? How so?
When local leaders know, okay, a certain amount of money is just going to arrive reliably every month, they can stop innovating. It's subtle. They might, without realizing it, cap their own ambition. Their local efforts kind of plateau because that external pressure to, succeed on their own terms, it's just lessened. So that dependable funding, which was meant purely to help, it can quietly stunt the drive for true context-specific growth.
Wow. Okay. And the harms you mentioned, the research details them, and they seem to go right to the heart of the mission's identity, like vision control, when the resources are controlled somewhere else.
Then the vision gets controlled somewhere else too. It's the classic dynamic. If the person or group paying the bills, covering the operational costs is in another country, maybe another continent, the mission's direction inevitably starts reflecting their priorities, not necessarily what the local community feels called to, right, in their own context.
That makes sense. That's the operational side. But you mentioned a spiritual cost too.
Yes, and that's perhaps even deeper. Repeated long-term dependency can send a subtle, damaging message. It can imply, even unintentionally, that the local people aren't fully trusted. Not trusted with God's provision or with leadership. And that directly undermines the core belief in their full human dignity, what theology calls the imago Dei, the image of God in everyone.
So it affects how they see themselves.
Exactly. If a local congregation starts seeing itself primarily as a recipient, as just waiting for help, the identity shifts. It goes from we are God's family working together on mission to something more like we are a project waiting for the next grant.
Oof, that's a huge shift.
It is. And that identity shift, that's the ultimate failure, both spiritually and organizationally.
And you can see how that failure would ripple out into the community. It hinders discernment, you said.
Yeah.
Because local leaders might just defer.
Precisely. They start looking outward to donor priorities when making crucial decisions, instead of digging deep into prayer and community discernment about their specific calling and cultural needs.
And the worst part, maybe, is how it impacts local giving.
Absolutely. It diminishes sacrificial giving. Because, if everything seems to be funded from outside, people lose that vital spiritual discipline of ownership, of contributing sacrificially themselves.
It makes sense. Why sacrifice if it feels like it's not really needed or not really their ministry to support?
Right. And the sources we looked at really hammer this home. The strength of a church or ministry isn't measured by the size of its foreign donor list. It's measured by the depth of its own collective faith, its own generosity. Think about the early church pooling resources or the widow giving her 2 tiny coins. The path to genuine abundance, biblically speaking, it starts with obedience, with faithfulness, with what you have, not necessarily with having massive outside affluence.
Okay, so this forces a confrontation with that identity crisis you mentioned.
It does.
So the goal becomes catalyzing that local obedience, shifting the whole focus. It's less about finding more wealth from outside.
And more about building an abundance of ownership from within.
That's a fundamental pivot, a theological one, really.
Absolutely. And it's not like we're inventing something new here. This shift, it's deeply rooted in Christian tradition, in Scripture. Take the parable of the talents, for example. That's a pretty clear mandate for stewardship as active faithfulness, multiplication. The resources, whatever they are entrusted to the local body not just to sit on, but to cultivate, to grow, to multiply what they've been given.
Right. It's about activation, not just reception.
Exactly. And crucially, this reframing also affirms the dignity of labor. You know, the Apostle Paul making tents.
Yeah, his side hustle.
Sort of.
Okay.
But it shows him doing vocational work alongside his ministry work. It underlines that everyday work, skills, trades, that's a form of worship too. It emphasizes that God has already equipped local people with valuable skills, with assets, with time. These are resources far beyond just cash donations.
That's powerful. So how do we translate that theological idea, that shift in thinking, into how an organization actually operates day to day?
The sources offer two really critical design principles or mandates for that. The first one is subsidiarity. It sounds technical, but it's simple. Decisions and ownership should reside as close to the people actually affected as possible. Keep it local.
Makes sense. And the second?
The second is dignity-first design. This means any program, even if it involves providing aid or resources, must be designed in a way that affirms local dignity and agency first.
So less about just delivering stuff.
Right. More about, say, creating jobs or enabling market access or building skills, things that empower people rather than reinforcing that recipient mentality.
If you start with the assumption that God has already equipped the local people with gifts, time, skills, land, relationships, you design programs differently. You unlock that dignity you were talking about.
Precisely. But then the big question becomes practical. How do you translate that identity of owner and steward into a tangible, measurable financial strategy?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, or maybe the $60,000 question based on our later example. How do you build consistent stewardship, especially in contexts that might feel unpredictable? Here's where it gets really practical, I think.
It does. And the core idea for sustainability is diversification. You absolutely cannot rely on a single source, especially not a single external source. You need multiple, ideally local income streams. That builds resilience against economic shocks or changes in donor focus.
Yeah. Okay, so what are the pathways? What kind of streams are we talking about?
The sources highlight a few key ones, quite established models, actually. First, there's local congregational giving. This isn't passive. It means actively, diligently teaching biblical stewardship and setting up regular, consistent giving cycles and commitments.
Building that culture of giving from within. Got it. What else?
Second, fee-for-service models. Where it's appropriate and adds value, you implement payments, often on a sliding scale based on ability to pay for services like, say, school tuition or clinic fees.
Okay, so people contribute towards services they value. Makes sense. Third
is social enterprise. This is about establishing businesses that are aligned with the mission. Think bakeries, farms, craft workshops, maybe guest houses. These businesses aren't just random. They exist specifically to generate profit that gets reinvested back into funding the core mission work.
Right, mission-driven businesses. Those first three feel vital.
Yeah.
But the research pointed to a fourth stream, one that seemed maybe less obvious but potentially huge.
Yes. Especially powerful in, say, urban areas or places with a lot of skilled professionals in the congregation. It's what the sources call skills-based stewardship.
Or the Fellowship of Shared Skills, I think they termed it.
Exactly. And it's brilliant organizationally. It's about mobilizing the professional expertise already sitting in the pews. Accountants, designers, builders, IT specialists, administrators.
Treating their skills and time as a form of offering.
Precisely. An offering that directly offsets costs the organization would otherwise have to pay for by contracting those services out.
And the numbers on this are pretty staggering when you actually calculate it.
They are. The sources provide an example. If you can mobilize just 7 skilled volunteers.
7 people.
Each contributing about 5 hours a week in their professional capacity, doing the books, designing materials, fixing computers, whatever it is. You could plausibly replace nearly $35,000 in outsourced contracted services over a year.
Wow, 35 grand. That's a massive chunk of budget for many organizations.
It is. And that capacity, that value, was right there all along. Untapped, waiting to be recognized and mobilized as a core local asset.
It completely reframed how you think about the congregation's wealth, doesn't it? It's not just about the offering plate.
Exactly. It transforms volunteer hours, skilled hours, into tangible financial capacity. And it connects people directly to the financial health and stewardship of the ministry in a very practical way.
Okay, so we have these potential income streams. Local giving, fees, enterprise, and skills. How do you actually make the transition?
Yeah.
It feels daunting going from 90% external funding to something sustainable.
It is ambitious, but the sources suggest breaking it down. They propose a structured, say, 36-month transition plan. It makes it manageable.
Right, the phased approach. Let's use their example. A ministry with a $60,000 annual budget. Pretty small. Relies heavily on outside money. Maybe only 10% comes from local sources right now, so that's just $6,000 a year.
Okay, so the goal under this plan isn't immediate self-sufficiency, it's progressive. Aiming for, say, 70% local revenue, which is $42,000 out of that 60K within 36 months, 3 years.
How do you phase that?
Year one, the target might be just 20% local revenue. That's $12,000 total. So they need to find an additional $6,000 locally that first year.
Okay, $6,000 extra. That feels achievable through maybe boosting, giving, and adding a small fee-for-service element?
Exactly. Then year two, the target jumps to 40% local revenue, so $24,000 total.
Another $12,000 increase needed in year two.
Right. And then year three, you aim for that 70% mark, the $42,000 total, another $18,000 increase.
It still sounds like a big jump by year three.
It is. But look at the feasibility levers we talked about. Remember that social enterprise example? The community bakery.
Yeah, the $5 profit per loaf.
If that bakery nets $5 per loaf and manages to sell just 300 loaves a month, that's only about 10 loaves a day.
Right.
That single small enterprise contributes $18,000 a year towards the budget.
Wow, okay. That alone hits the year three target increase.
Precisely. Or maybe it's a combination. The bakery brings in $10, increased giving brings in $5, and skills-based stewardship saves another $3 in costs. The key is having clear, measurable targets tied to specific, planned local activities. It makes the climb manageable.
But that plan, that 36-month climb, it's only going to work if the foundations are solid, right? The sources were really clear on this. Financial change needs structural integrity. Governance matters.
Absolutely critical. You can't expect spiritual formation and responsible stewardship to flourish in shaky or untrustworthy structures. The research highlights really 3 non-negotiables for demonstrating local maturity and trustworthiness.
Okay, what are they?
First, you must have a local majority board. And that board needs real authority over budgets and strategy. They can't just be an advisory group rubber stamping external decisions.
Real local control at the top.
Yep.
Got it.
Second, transparent accounting. No wiggle room here. This means regular, monthly financial reports shared openly, and an annual independent audit or at least an external financial review builds trust.
Transparency builds trust. Makes sense. And the third?
Third, demonstrating wisdom through resilience. This means having a policy and following it to maintain a reserve fund, typically aiming for 1 to 3 months of operating costs set aside. It shows foresight.
Local board authority, transparent books, and a safety net reserve.
Those signal real responsible ownership is taking root.
And that maturation, that strengthening of local structure, it seems like it forces a necessary, maybe even uncomfortable shift for the donors back home too.
It absolutely does. And it should. The donor's role has to evolve radically. They need to move away from simply sustaining dependency and embrace becoming catalysts for independence.
So what does that look like? Catalytic support.
It means donor funds shouldn't be treated as indefinite operational subsidies anymore. You're not just covering this month's salaries or the electricity bill forever. Instead, support needs to shift entirely towards things like capacity building.
Like what specifically?
Investing in leadership training, helping set up those robust financial systems we talked about, maybe funding governance coaching for the new local board, building their ability to manage things well.
Okay. Building their muscle. What else?
And providing risk capital. This is crucial. Seed funding for those social enterprises. Startup money involves risk, and that's a legitimate catalytic role for external partners. But it's time-bound, project-focused investment, not perpetual operational support.
So investing in their future capacity, not just covering present costs. How do you structure that kind of partnership?
The main tool recommended is something called a transition covenant.
A covenant sounds serious.
It is, in a good way. It's a formal, written agreement between the donor and the local organization. It's time-bound, maybe tied to that 36-month plan, and it explicitly outlines decreasing percentages of external support over time. Maybe 75% funding in year 1, 50% in year 2, 25% in year 3, then 0.
And crucially,
Crucially, releasing those funds is tied directly to the local organization, achieving specific, agreed-upon milestones related to their income generation, their governance, their reserves.
so it's accountability on both sides. The
Mhm.
donor commits to phase support, the local partner commits to measurable progress towards independence.
Exactly. It frames the support clearly as an investment in their journey to maturity, not just a handout covering a line item indefinitely.
Okay, stepping back then, looking at the whole picture.
If we connect all these dots, you see that financial independence, it's not really the ultimate goal in itself. It's more like the necessary beginning, the platform for genuine local stewardship to flourish.
Right, it enables the real mission.
Yes. And success then gets measured in 2 ways. Spiritually, do the local people, the congregation, feel that deep sense of ownership, of responsibility for their mission? And practically, are there multiple diverse revenue streams? Are there financial reserves? Is there accountable, transparent local leadership firmly in place?
That combination builds something that can last.
Huh.
An enduring legacy, as you said.
That's the vision.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now?
We've journeyed through this idea that, well, sometimes the help that feels essential, that perpetual external support, can actually, despite the best intentions, end up kind of starving a ministry of its own dignity, its own long-term potential.
Mm-hmm.
We've looked at the blueprint for change,
Mm.
shifting that core identity from feeling like a project to embracing being an owner.
Diversifying income, using all the local assets, money, yes, but also skills, time, enterprise,
Putting in place solid, transparent governance.
and fundamentally reshaping the role of donors, asking them to become partners in building capacity, not permanent patrons.
It's a big shift. It is. And this journey, make no mistake, it requires incredible courage, creativity too, and real spiritual clarity from leaders, both on the ground and those providing support. But when it happens, it realigns everything: work, giving, community life with that true identity, responsible stewards of God's mission in their place.
Which brings us to the final thought, the provocative question that really drives this whole movement, this whole shift in thinking. What if? What if the end of external support isn't actually the threat we often perceive it to be? What if instead it's the necessary catalyst, the beginning of truly authentic, spirit-empowered local stewardship?
A challenging thought.
It is. And it prompts another question for all of us, wherever we sit in this ecosystem. What steps could you take, maybe even starting today, to ensure the next generation inherits not dependency, but a vibrant, enduring legacy of local faithfulness?